Hello, I'm Anika from Made to Sew. In this video, we're going to be talking about my top 5 most used sewing tools. Now, I often get asked what tools do I use and what do I recommend. So over the last month or so, I've been really analysing what I use in my studio on a day-to-day basis so that I can provide you with some recommendations. Now, I hope that this video will be useful to those of you that are beginners looking for some items to purchase, but it also might be useful if you've been sewing for a while and you want to know what I recommend and what I use. So let's get started. Now, we're going to begin with a tool that you are going to need if you're planning on sewing or dressmaking, and it is a pair of scissors. Now, I have over 20 pairs of scissors that I own and that I've accumulated over the years. But there was one pair in particular that I reached for time and time again over the last few months. And surprisingly, it's probably the cheapest pair and definitely the most readily accessible. And that is these Fiskars dressmaking scissors in the 25 centimeter, 8-inch length. Now, I've had a think about why I use this pair of scissors over some of the others that I own. They're sharp, but most of the scissors that I own are nice and sharp and cut well. So I think the reason why I pick up these time and time again is mainly based on the comfort and the feel on my hand. I find these really comfortable to use, especially for extended periods of time because they're nice and light. Having a comfortable pair of scissors is really important, especially if you're planning to cut out a lot during a day, because that fatigue can build up over time. Now, you might be wondering why I haven't suggested a rotary cutter, and you may ask, do I use one? And I do use a rotary cutter, generally for specific types of material. I might use a rotary cutter if I'm working with stretchy fabrics or potentially fabrics that are nice and lightweight and I don't want to lift them off the table surface to cut them. Even small, tricky things such as cutting out lingerie patterns, I might use my rotary cutter for. I know some people prefer using a rotary cutter to scissors for all of their cutting needs, and that's absolutely fine. You can use what works best for you. One thing to note with your scissors is that I would recommend having a separate pair of scissors for your fabric as well as paper. I have a different pair of scissors that I use when I'm cutting out paper. And this just helps to protect your fabric scissors and keeps them from being dulled over time. If you're lucky enough to have more than one pair of dressmaking scissors, it can be a good idea to assign one pair to the more luxury, lightweight fabrics, such as silks. That will ensure they're protected and always sharp with those fabrics. However, if you look after your scissors, they will last you a long time. I've had these for I think about 10 years, and I don't remember ever having this pair sharpened either, and they're still cutting really well. Let's move on to tool number 2. And I think this might surprise you because it's often considered an afterthought when it comes to sewing, especially when you're first learning. I think there's a lot of importance put on the sewing machine that you use and what that sewing machine can do. But you forget how often you are going to be ironing. When I'm sewing, I'm generally using my sewing machine for one step and then I use my iron for the next step. So I'm using my iron pretty much as I'm using my sewing machine. And of course, it has a really important role in ensuring you have a professional looking garment. So choosing and using a quality iron is really important. Now, I use and have done for a long time irons by the brand Laura Star. However, they are a bit pricey. So although I do really recommend them, there are a number of other options that you can purchase that will be cheaper. The key is that you want an iron that you have control over and that you can really trust. You want the iron to not get too hot to scorch your material. You also want the steam control to be good so that when you're using the steam on your fabric, you're not getting water droplets everywhere. I would recommend looking at some reviews online to find something that is good quality and that will ensure that the time you spend sewing your garment isn't ruined by a poor iron damaging it. Now, the next item that I use all of the time is a measuring item. When you start dressmaking, I think a lot of people jump to purchase a tape measure, and you do need a tape measure in order to measure the body. But for me, I only use my tape measure for measuring bodies. I don't use it the rest of the time at all. Now, my most used measuring tool are actually these plastic rulers, and they come in both metric measurements as well as in imperial measurements. They're see-through and they're super lightweight. I find that I use these all the time when I'm pattern drafting, adjusting a pattern, marking the stitching lines onto my garments, pressing up a hem, you name it. I literally pick up one of these if I need to do any measuring. The clear plastic rulers in metric are by a brand called Clover, and they come in a 30 centimeter and 50 centimeter length. The imperial option is cheaper by a brand called So Easy, and this one's a little tired. It's actually lost a little bit, so I need to purchase a new one. But I think I've had this ruler for 15 plus years, so it's about time I get a new one. A little word of warning, be cautious with these rulers around the iron. I will always use them at the iron to press up my hem allowances, press seam allowances, binding, whatever it is I'm doing. And then I walk away and leave them quite close to the iron and have melted a few. So just be careful with that. So we now have a tool for cutting out, the iron for pressing our seams, and a tool that we can use for pattern drafting, adjusting a pattern, or measuring things on our garment. My next recommendation is something to mark your garment. There are a variety of things that you can use and other items that I own, removable pens, pens that come off with heat. I have got different chalks, a chalk that comes off with the iron, a chalk block. But my most used item for marking are these little chalk pens. These are by a brand called Clover, and it's the Clover Chaco pen. But you can also buy other brands. This one is from a company in Japan. I bought it in Japan. I don't know what the company is. This is a Chakona, also from Japan. Now, what I love about these is that they have a really nice fine wheel. They distribute a fine line of chalk, and it's just enough chalk to be able to see the line, but not so much that it gets everywhere and can't be removed. There are other brands that do similar tools, but I've generally found that these Clover ones or the Japanese ones are better. They produce a finer line and seem to spill not as much chalk. Now, they come in a variety of different colors. You can have white, gray, I also have yellow, but the white is what I use the majority of the time, and if you want to purchase one, is what I would recommend. One recommendation is I have tried in the past to refill them with a different powder chalk rather than the replacement, and I have had issues with that chalk not going through the wheel correctly. So I would recommend purchasing the correct refills. Now, the final tool is something that you need to hold your layers of fabric together when you take them to the sewing machine. You can use pins, you can use clips, you can even use a basting or tacking stitch by hand. You don't have to secure the whole seam if you don't want to. You might just want to secure certain points that have to be matched together. Now, my most used item is pins, and specifically these glass-headed silk pins or superfine pins. Now, you can buy simple, cheap steel pins, and in the bulk size like this, you can even get different lengths and different thicknesses. So these are a longer and thinner variety. But I still find that I reach for those superfine silk pins more often. I love how they glide through the fabric, and that helps prevent issues of pins snagging your material. The downside is that if you were working with a very heavyweight material, such as a heavyweight denim, they could bend. So in that case, you would want to choose a thicker pin. Generally, I would recommend glass-headed over plastic heads. I find that the plastic heads aren't always as sharp, and you can have an issue where you can't iron them because the plastic could melt. Unless you're planning on solely working with heavyweight materials, I would recommend that you give the glass-headed superfine or silk pins a try. You can purchase them from Clover as well as the Prim brands. So those are my 5 most used sewing tools that I am using every single day. I have one extra bonus item, which is a pair of snips, and I use this to trim my threads at the sewing machine or after sewing, as well as clipping into necklines to release curves and things like that. You can buy these from different brands, and again, I have an assortment, but this pair is my favorite. They're by a brand called Ginga. Now you know what I'm using. I would love to know what's on your sewing essentials list. Please do share in the comments, as I'm sure it will be useful for other people. I will link in the description box below to everything that I've used. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.